Today, the good news is we're going to talk about tithing, and here's why it's good news for you. I am going to argue against the rule of tithing. Tithing is the Christian practice of giving the first 10% of their income, forgive the typo, to the church. Now, some of you are wondering where I'm going. I don't think it is a rule that we have to follow. Let's define what a rule is. Rules are typically strict and absolute with clear consequences for breaking them. They are designed to be followed without exception and are often enforced through punishment and discipline. So according to that definition, does the Bible require tithing as a rule? The first response is yes. Yes, in the Old Testament, tithing is in the Bible as a rule, and he commanded them to tithe. Deuteronomy says this in several places. You shall tithe all the yield of your seed that comes from the field year by year, and before the Lord your God, in the place that he will choose to make his name dwell there. The very end of the Old Testament has Malachi encouraging to bring the full tithe to the storehouse. This is a very clear rule that God made. That tithe went towards providing for the needs of the Levites, and this was the tribe in Israel that performed the priestly functions. And those Levites, those priests and the workers of the temple or the tabernacle, they lived off these tithes. But the coming of Jesus fulfilled the law of the Old Testament, and many of the rules have been done away with. Now we are to be driven by the rule of love. Paul writes this in Romans 13. He says, owe nothing to anyone except for your obligation to love one another. If you love your neighbor, you will fulfill the requirements of God's law. For these and other such commandments are summed up in this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to others, so love fulfills the requirements of God's law. So now in the New Testament, there's this new, big, overarching rule. Love God and love others. Now in another letter to another church in Corinth, Paul writes to this church in regards to money. But remember this, a farmer who plants only a few seeds will get a small crop, but the one who plants generously will get a generous crop. You must each decide in your heart how much to give, and don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure. For God loves a person who gives cheerfully, and God will generously provide all you need. Then you will always have everything you need and plenty left over to share with others. Now notice he says we're not supposed to give under compulsion. If from the New Testament perspective, tithing was a rule, I think this would be a moment where Paul would remind them, don't forget to follow the rule of tithing. It's not a hard and fast rule. Rather, it's a big invitation to live into the freedom of generosity. You see, it's not about rules. Rather, Paul is describing kingdom values of giving that support the ministry. Kingdom values. Let's define some values. Values are a set of principles or beliefs that an individual or group holds to be important and guides their behavior and their decision making. They are far less rigid than rules and less specific than guidelines. Paul is talking about the kingdom value of generosity, that we as Christ followers are invited into this generosity. He directly deals with their money because they're invited into being generous with their money for the support of ongoing ministry that is happening. This is one of the kingdom values, the kingdom of Jesus, the values that are part of the kingdom of Jesus. Because God gave extravagantly in creating the world, gave extravagantly in giving his only son to make a way for us to be reunited with God, reconciled to God. So we, as agents of his kingdom, enact his value of generosity in every way possible. And there are a few principles that are in this that guide us towards what it means to be a people of this kingdom value of generosity. So there's three we'll quickly take a look at. The first principle, we will reap what we sow. Paul says the point is this: the one who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. The one who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So in thinking about the ministry of New Hope Foursquare, if we do not sow generously into supporting the ministry here at New Hope, we will reap sparingly. This is a principle that we understand. But if we sow generously, we will reap generously. The second principle, God loves a cheerful giver. Each of you should give as you have made up your mind, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. We should be seriously minded about our giving, but we should never get serious on the side of worry or angst. A portion of our income and we're seeking to give it and it feels really sacrificial to us. We could be a joyful giver and we can even be like, I cannot outgive God. Whoo! That's a big statement because there's a line that we would all come to and say, well, this might be outgiving God. Like if I give this much away, he won't provide for me anymore. My future won't be secure anymore. And I think God is like, really? Have you looked outside on one of the clear nights that we've had lately, and have you seen how I've hung the stars just so? Have you noticed the preciseness that the universe is functioning in? And I'm maintaining that just fine. Thank you very much. Maybe this is an opportunity for you to laugh with me. You've been deceived. You think you're your own maker. You think you're your own provider. You think all this stuff is yours. You think that you came up with it all. Ha 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 ha. Here's a key point. We don't give what is ours. We give what is his. We don't own anything. We are simply stewards. We live in an ownership-centric part of history and part of the world. We think of stupid things like owning land, like we own this. We don't own land. We steward a marked out piece of property. We steward it. We don't own anything. It's a falseness for us to think of ourselves as owners. We are stewards. And when we recognize that, it's much easier to give because we're just passing through what we are stewarding. Principle number 3, God provides for the one who gives. That's just true. For God is the one who provides seed for the farmer and then bread to eat. In the same way, he will provide and increase your resources and then produce a great harvest of generosity in you. God provides for the one who gives. This is his world. My life is his life. He cares about it and has the resource to meet need. Jesus picks this up when he says, give and it will be given to you. Here's the principle. When we give, it will be given to us. Here's what I think about tithing. I think it's a helpful guideline. In contrast to a rule, guidelines are more flexible and offer suggested courses of action or best practices without necessarily being enforceable. They are meant to provide direction and assistance rather than hard and fast rules to be followed at all times. So I made this chart for you to help you think about this. Rules, guidelines, values. We started by talking about asking the question, is this a rule? Rigid, clear, specific, bringing condemnation and shame for all those who are out it, being very narrow. Some rules are really good, like don't kill your wife. No matter how you think about her, don't kill your child. Don't kill anyone. How about that? That's a good rule. It's a really good rule. Values are flexible. Kingdom values. So we're to be people of generosity. That's a value, and it's immense, and it calls us into account in every area of our lives. Guidelines are in between the rules and the values, and they give us something to measure. They give us a parameter. And that's what I feel like Jesus is inviting us as a congregation into. Courageously considering that the guideline of tithing is a great place to start. I think giving the first 10% of our income to the ministry of the local church here at New Hope, that's a great place to start. It's a great principle. It's a great guideline. It helps you to know if you're getting into the generous zone. I made another chart for you. Out of my love for you this morning, I thought this chart would also be good. We have two sides of this continuum. We have the Scrooge side of things, and then we have the generous side. And Scrooge says, mine. But this is the zone. And again, this is a guideline. But if you're somebody that is just unwilling to give your resource to the local church to support the ministry, you're walking outside of the biblical precedent, and you're kind of on that part of mine. And you're kind of landing on that part of like, I'm going to be a taker, and I'm going to allow everybody else to do this work. I want to be very clear. Every individual circumstance is different in this room, but nobody gets to dictate to God, I will be generous with everything but my money. And so again, I think this is a good guideline. Move towards 10%, and then you're starting to get into the generous zone. You're starting to get into the zone of like, wow, God has actually met all of my needs as I've received 100% from him, stewarded that, giving 10%, and what else does God want me to do with my life? So I would encourage us to get into the generous zone, to take a risk with God. I think the practice of tithing 10% of your income is a great starting point for developing a lifestyle of generosity. Not a rule that you have to be afraid of, but a guideline that empowers you.